Hi everyone, my name is Chance Alexander and I'm here today with Andrew Whitman. Andrew, say hi to everybody.
Hey, how you doing?
We built our team together for the Milwaukee Regionals in 2023, where I was able to get day two, and this is also more notably known as P Don's team, aka Patrick Donegan, where he was able to get top 16 at Fresno Regionals with it. The main concept of the team was to use Grimmsnarls as a screen setter and support Pokemon to help win mirror matches against some of the more common and prevalent Pokemon in the meta. But before we dig too much into that, just a little bit of introduction about myself. I've been playing Pokemon since I was a kid, but competitively I started in 2014, where I went to an AIC for my very first year of playing, back when it was best of one closed sheet Swiss. So I go way back, but I took many years off between 2016 to 2023 due to going to college and then COVID hitting. So um, both finances and limited amount of events had kept me from playing for a very long time, and here I am again to show the world what I can do and what I can build. Andrew, you want to talk a bit about yourself too?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I played Pokemon as a kid as well, and didn't get into the competitive scene until just this year. Uh, February of 23 was the first time I actually played uh, a doubles battle in any capacity. So I'm very new to this, but it's been good to learn a lot and work with Chance here. So
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. And you've been doing great for your first season as well. Andrew is by far the smartest guy I know when it comes to Pokemon knowledge, and also the ability to create spreads, create calcs, understand what we should prepare for. And so I think we made a really good duo in that regard. So that's enough about us. Let's just go ahead and talk about the team. I've got the paste up here. Um, so just a quick overview of the team. Like I said, we use Grimmsnarl as our main support Pokemon. And then we ran Tinglu, Gyarados, Fluttermane, Iron Hands, and Goldango. So the main concept behind this team is that in most games, you're going to want to set up one or both screens. Um, we have two options for setup Pokemon between Goldango and Iron Hands. And then Gyarados and Tinglu were used to sort of amplify the mileage of the screens, if you will, by being able to drop and Intimidate to further reduce physical damage that was incoming, and then Vessel of Ruin on Tinglu's side to further drop the special damage from opposing Pokemon. And then to round it all out, we have the most popular Pokemon in the format of Fluttermane. Flutter was really used mostly for specific niche matchups, and we can dive a little bit more into that later. But it's also just one of the hardest hitting Pokemon in the format, and there were times where we definitely needed some immediate offensive pressure, and so Fluttermane was able to fulfill that pretty well. So if we look specifically into the sets here for a second, Grimmsnarl is primarily bulked into special defense, and the reason why is obviously opposing Fluttermane. The main calc that everyone should know with Grimmsnarl is that with this specific spread, you are able to survive any fairy attack from Fluttermane outside of Terra Fairy, Specs, pretty much max special attack Moonblast. D-Gleam will not pick it up, is important to call out. The other scenario is if it is next to Chi-Yu, you do not need to Terra Fairy, but you must still commit the Moonblast unless obviously you do like a D-Gleam Heatwave kind of scenario. In my experience, not a lot of people were leading Flutter U into us. I think it's because of the combination of Light Screen and Tinglu. There was I remember there was some discussion on Boiler TV. Is that what they go by, Andrew?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure. I'm pretty sure it's called. Oh no, it's Tub Takes, right? Tub
Oh,
Takes.
oh, yeah, Tub Takes. Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes
there was some
yeah.
discussion on Tub Takes. That's what it was. About how Grimmsnarl felt like a wasted slot. Not this is not verbatim by them anyway. This is just sort of my takeaway from watching it. But I know that they had discussed a game plan into it for taking out the Grimmsnarl immediately, and it makes the team fall apart. But I think after playing numerous showdown games, people started to adapt into how to play into this, and they were learning that trading Grimmsnarl for Fluttermane was not ideal in the subsequent 3v3 that would occur. And I believe that we saw some of the New Balance teams evolve to handle that in a way. So, again, we could talk more about specific matchups later. Let's just get back into the Pokemon for now. So, like I was saying, Grim is primarily a special tank. There's no speed, no attack, it's just strict defenses. Terra type was Ghost because we were running into some issues with Chien-Pao Dragonite, namely Inner Focus Dragonite with the banded Terra Normal Extreme Speed. And so Terra Ghost is one way to at least scare off the E-Speed. As for moves, we chose both Screens, Spirit Break as our offensive move, and then Thunder Wave as speed control, because our team certainly lacks in speed control. We don't have anything outside of Thunder Wave. Moving on to Ting Lu, you'll see that we have kind of a more offensive Ting Lu than I think some people run. Andrew, I think you could talk a little bit more on the EV spread here, but I know that in terms of attack, you need 76 Adamant to KO Frail Chi-Yu, and then we put in 40 extra attack. Was that for Fluttermane, right?
Uh, yeah, 116 Adamant picks up most Fluttermanes.
Yeah,
You do miss the very, very bulkiest.
right, like the
Uh,
Gavin Fluttermane.
yeah,
252 bold.
yeah.
His is bold, right? Or is it 4 modest?
No, his is 252, 252 bold.
Okay, got it. Um, I also don't really remember what we were EV specifically for defensively, but what I do know is that we pumped a majority of it into special defense because that increases the value of Assault Vest being able to multiply that stat number by 1.5. And outside of that, HP and defense were split pretty evenly, and then we just put 4 as a dump into speed. In terms of moves, we chose Heavy Slam to take out the Fluttermanes, like I mentioned, Ruination because it's just a great unique move for all the ruins, being able to chip 50% health, and then if it misses, I can get a boosted Stomping Tantrum. Snarl was used mainly for combinations of either like Armored DD Trick Room, or it was used for some of the Dozo matchups where they have Chi-Yu, Bundle, and Glumora. Snarl was extremely helpful. And then, like I mentioned, Stomping Tantrum, it's just the best ground coverage move that I can reliably use. Did you have anything more that you wanted to touch on, Andrew, in terms of the EVs or set here?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, it was just behind screens. People were pretty much forced to double it, which they could since we don't run Protect with the Assault Vest. But
Mm-hmm.
even with that, um, people find that it still was taking pitiful damage from the opposition. So
Yep.
it could always damage trade better with allowing the partner to do something and getting off ruinations at minimum. So
Right. Yeah, and you really cannot talk highly enough about the tankiness of this Pokemon, right? Because I remember at Day 2 Milwaukee, I don't remember who I was playing, but my Ting Lu was Terra Poison behind Light Screen with about 40 health, and there was a Specs Terra Fairy Fluttermane on the other side who used a Helping Hand boosted D-Gleam, and it didn't even take Ting Lu out from 40, and I was able to trade a Heavy Slam KO, so yeah, just the combination of the Assault Vest, Vessel of Ruin, and Light Screen. People had a lot of issues removing it from field of play, and I think that the chip damage it can provide and the support it can provide is just invaluable. Um, so moving on to Gyarados, this is clearly a very support-oriented Gyarados. You'll notice that a lot of our EV spreads are quite defensive. So specifically, this one is 236 health for the even Citrus Berry recovery, and 156 special defense with a boosting nature to special defense. Um, the main reason for this is because Light Screen, if you're behind Light Screen, Gyarados can actually take uh, most Thunderbolts, whether it's a Goldango Specs Thunderbolt. I believe it could live some some Fluttermane Thunderbolts. It depends on the spread. And then defensively, with Reflect, you could definitely live a Wild Charge at -1. I'm pretty sure. From Iron Hands, that is. The
Yeah,
re-
yeah.
yeah, the rest of the EVs, 52 speed, lets us speed creep some of the slower Gyarados. That being said, I think I found myself losing a lot of the Gyarados speed ties, which makes sense, I feel like, because if we look at like 45 Mice's Gyarados, he was running an incredibly fast Gyarados, jolly and almost max speed, if I recall. Um,
Yeah, most weren't as fast as his at
right,
all. But
I agree.
our speed tier was very middling. So
Yep,
either you got into speed ties or people just speed creep that. But it is faster than min speed, so it had some utility against other Gyarados getting off a taunt.
yep, and I think that this speed stat was ripped straight from the Nerd of Now calculator, the speed stat at least, so speed ties were quite common, like you said. Uh, and yeah, not a lot of Gyarados were slower than ours. But in terms of Terra type, we chose Fairy. At one point, we had Grass to avoid Amoonguss and to just ensure that we can't get spored. But ultimately, we changed to Fairy, namely for Iron Hands, because one, it allowed us to take Wild Charge at neutral, and two, if we're facing setup hands, it really discouraged them from Drain Punching us, because they would just do such minimal damage with Intimidate, Reflect, um, and then we would be able to start spamming our status and support moves, or even just pure waterfalls if they've Terrafired their hands. Um, so back to the moveset, we have another Thunder Wave user for more speed control. I mean, if you're running Gyarados without Thunder Wave, you've got to be running some offensive variant because this is just the best support move on Gyarados in my opinion. Helping Hand, despite the fact that Gyarados has no hands, Helping Hand is used for a couple of very niche matchups that we can go into later, but overall it's just really good for getting extra damage on your partner Pokemon. Waterfall as the primary damage move, it's the best water move it learns, and then Taunt to stop opposing Amoonguss, any setup or other status moves that Pokemon may be using. So, before I move into Fluttermane, is there anything you wanted to add, Andrew?
Uh, no, I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay. Alright, so then moving on, we have Fluttermane. This is where things get a little, I don't want to say complex because they're not really complex, but they're very intentional, I should say. This is a very intentional EV spread.
Yeah, it's
Um,
not a standard Fluttermane. Obviously, you see the
yes,
hex and it's like, what's going on there?
exactly right. So just we'll spend a little bit of time talking about this for sure. This is Booster Special Attack, Fluttermane. Um, the main concept with this Flutter build is to put yourself in a scenario to get off fast substitutes and be able to take advantage of some of the status that we have spread across the board. So 20 health ensures a guaranteed 4 substitutes with 1 HP remaining at the end of it. That came into play a lot for me. Andrew, I don't know about you, but there were numerous games at both NAIC and Milwaukee where I was able to put out 4 substitutes. Did you encounter
Yeah,
that?
yeah, I mean, in certain board states, if you just keep subbing before anyone can attack, then yeah.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I mean, our Flutter is not timid
Mhm.
and it's not speed boosting, so um, it's definitely not the fastest thing out there. But there's
Yes.
still a vast majority of Pokemon that you know you're just automatically faster than. So
Yep. I found Sub to be really good into my round one opponent at NAIC where they had Garganical, Wo-Chien, Glamora, and they were
sure,
spamming like Moral Spin, Salt Cure, and
yeah,
the Sub was able to take both of those moves,
yeah,
and it can't be seeded. So it was very, very good in that matchup. But
yes,
anyway, the health and defense, I believe that was able to live a Palafin Jet Punch, not Terra Water, but just zero to hero Jet Punch if I recall. Um,
I believe so. I know for sure it lived Jolly Ice Spinner from Shen Pao, but towards the end
yes.
of the format they switched to Adamant, which
Mhm.
it was not living.
Right.
But at the same time, we had screens, so
Yep.
that calc really wasn't as relevant anyway.
Yep.
uh,
I even found myself considering like maybe in hindsight we could have pumped some more special attack into this. But at the end of the day, I don't think it was really that necessary given that we're modest and we're boosting special. Um, so I think the difference between dropping some defense for some special, in hindsight, probably doesn't make a lot of difference. And special
No.
attack is mostly our dump stat because the main things we wanted to do were 4 substitutes guaranteed, living the Chien Pao spinner. And then the speed stat is very important as well. It outspeeds every mouse hold. It hits 181, correct? Either that or 180.
It hits
Um,
180. Yeah,
180,
it
yeah,
just
because
decreased mouse hold
right,
jolly
because
by one.
that hits 179, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yep. And then 4 special defense just because you had 4 left over. Um, so for the moves, we have Moonblast, self-explanatory. Hex. Hex was really, really good. It better than Shadow Ball for our team. Maybe not for most teams. But given that our speed control is just Thunder Wave, it was very nice.
And we have
Um,
priority Thunderwave with Grimmsnarl and the
yes,
Thunderwave from Gyarados, so there were lots of
yes.
opportunities to get that across the board.
Yeah, that's something that's really slept on as well, is the ability to instantly nuke something with Hex. And it even made me want to switch to Terra Ghost for some time, but that would kind of ruin our Mouse 8 matchup. Um, so even like priority Thunderwave into Hex was able to OHKO a lot of things. Like I remember when we were practicing against Adit, um, I used a priority Thunderwave into their Arcanine and hexed it for 100 health, like 100% of the health. And I calced it afterwards. It was a damage roll, but the fact that I was able to just one-shot an Arcanine with priority was hilarious to me. And it really put them in such a catastrophic board position that it allows you to win off of tempo in that regard. Um,
Yep.
so yeah, our team in particular benefited a lot from Hex. So, is there anything else you wanted to talk about on Fluttermane? I think that I've covered most of it outside of the specific matchups.
Yeah. T-Wave, Hex, and Domungus also takes from like, well, depending on how specially invested they are, but it takes from 70. Wow.
Yep, it
It's
definitely does.
pretty amazing.
Yep, and there was another matchup at NAIC that I played where I don't recall exactly what happened, but I know I got their Amoonguss down to about 60 to 70, and it was paralyzed, so I just brought in Flutter and I hexed it straight to 0.
Yep.
And that was very valuable because it got rid of a lot of the maneuverability of their team.
Yep.
Um, and also, obviously, Substitute is very nice to avoid Spore.
Yep.
I tried, well, we tried to make this team pretty anti-Amoonguss. We ended up having some issues with it down the road, but we did have a lot of answers for it, given we have Taunt, Substitute here, and then we had Goggles on hands, and then Goldango's ability, Good as Gold, obviously helped us there.
Yeah.
So,
We were mostly fine in terms of Spore and Rage Powder.
yep.
When it came to Clear Smogamungus is when we can talk more.
Yeah, Smogamungus ended up being a big problem down the road, and yeah, we'll talk about that. So just moving on to Iron Hands now. I can't quite recall exactly what the defensive EVs did. I know that we originally took the spread from somebody else and then adjusted it to our liking. Um, but to just go over the basics, it has safety goggles, like I said, to avoid Amoonguss Rage Powder and Amoonguss Spores. I did consider Lumberry at a time, but the downside of Lumberry is that you don't avoid Rage Powder, and after one status move, you would be forced to Terra, uh, depending on if you were Fire or Grass. And then in terms of the moves and EVs, we had Drain Punch and Wild Charge as our damage moves, with Swords Dance as a setup move, and Detect. That's pretty standard for most of the setup hands that have been going in the meta. The most important EV on this spread is the speed. We have quite a bit. I actually learned just a few days ago it's the same speed stat that Brian Yum ran. So we would have speed tied him if we ever played him, but we didn't. And the main purpose of this speed stat is if Garchomp ever terastallized into something defensive such as Steel, we would then outspeed a paralyzed Garchomp. Initially, this was 108, so we could outspeed paralyzed Chi-Yu. But then as Garchomp started to pick up in popularity after Milwaukee, we made that adjustment. Um,
Yeah. And in general, I guess the first reason is just to try to outspeed other hands. But
yes.
uh, we kind of just landed here in the niche scenario of the Garchomp.
Yep.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
mainly it was to win the hand speed mirror as well because although we do have a slight advantage with reflect, it is still hard to win the matchups where there's just two boosted hands drain punching each other for 5 turns in a row, you know.
Yeah, yeah, you need to.
Especially like if we go first and we have nothing to heal, that puts us in a kind of bad spot where they get the heal after. But yeah, basically the hands mirror is tricky to say the least. Um, do you recall any of the specific defensive calcs that we ran?
Well, we were always 76 adamant. That's just kind of
Yep.
what you need for a set of hands at minimum.
Mhm.
Um, we ran 76 HP just to have a good amount of bulk and be like one less than a poison tick or a salt cure tick.
Oh
And
right.
then
Yeah. So this minimized salt cure damage is what it was.
yeah, and then I mean we put as much special as we could. We had more at one point and we were slower, and then we
Mhm.
sacrificed a bit and put more speed.
Yep.
And then the defense was just generally to remain bulky, even if you don't have a reflect or anything. I mean, it already has a super high defensive stat, but in general, our team, uh, yeah, it was nice to have even more defensive investment on hands. So
Yep. I think that's the gist of it. So in that case, the last one to talk about is our boy Goldango. I love this thing, by the way. I have a newfound love for Goldango after both of these tournaments. Um, the most important stats here are health and speed. The health is maximized for leftovers recovery, and then the speed hits 118, which will outspeed Modest Pelipper. Does this still outspeed the Jolly T-Tar, Andrew?
yeah. Oh,
Yes.
Jolly T-Tar? No.
No, just
It
Adamant.
outspeed,
Adamant
yeah,
Max.
outspeed
Okay.
that.
Okay, so it outspeeds Adamant Max Speed T-Tar and then Pelipper as well. Modest Pelipper, that is. I don't think that a lot of people ran Timid Pelipper, so I thought this was a pretty safe speed stat to hit. And also big
Yeah.
shout out to Patrick Pedons, who gave us this feedback after Fresno, saying that he undersped a Pelipper and it felt really bad, so we made the change. Um, Originally, we did have 76 special attack EVs, but we took some out to hit that speed stat. And then the defense and special defense stats, I don't think we ever really optimized those per se, but rather we just wanted some pretty even bulk across the board. And I felt like we were bringing Goldango into a lot of the physical oriented matchups versus the special. So I felt physical defense was just a wee bit more important.
Yeah, yeah. We could have gone like minimums on these and just put everything into speed. But we opted for the just even bulkier behind screens version.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, and I think that ended up paying off a lot as well. Granted, if I played better at NAIC, this would have been more payoff, but like I had told Andrew and a lot of other people that in one of my matches, I had Goldango sitting at 66 health behind Light Screen Terra Water, and it just ate a Moonblast from Fluttermane and survived at 6. Um, the issue is that I went for a double protect because I didn't think I would survive it. So I guess I should have just trusted in the EV spreads a little more. And that was booster speed flutter in terms of the calc I'm talking about. So not the most common scenario that you would run into. Usually you would see specs, like timid specs, but booster speed was picking up a lot in popularity. So
yeah,
that's on me for, in hindsight, I guess not running that calc in my head, I suppose. But yeah, is there anything else you want to talk about Goldingo? Because I think we're about ready to get into the matchups.
no, I mean generally just super bulky. You get up nasty plots and you hit things. Uh,
Yep.
yeah, A lot of things were just if you get up a nasty plot, it kills. If you don't, then it doesn't. Um,
Yeah.
Super bulky things, obviously, that's not going to be the case, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, and I guess one that we could talk about now is the fact that this thing cannot OHKO Fluttermane with Make It Rain. That's the one thing that really irked me about it. We even, for a moment, we considered Metal Coat over Leftovers to be able to pinch the KO on Flutter, but into some of the bulkier Flutters, we're still not getting the KO, just due to the natively high special defense stat that Fluttermane has. Even with Life Orb, we weren't killing some of the most tanky. Um, so we just dropped that idea as a whole and went back to Leftovers.
Yep.
Alright, so, back to this. I guess we could talk about the general ideas and strategies real briefly, because I feel like it's pretty obvious from this point. Into most teams, we would lead Grim plus a setup Pokemon, one of these two. Because, well, one, you can get up the required screen, and then use your setup move. We would typically have one of Gyarados or Ting Lu, or both, in the back, to be able to reduce some of the other damage coming in, like we were talking about. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the game plan for 80% of the teams we've played against, I would say. Grim plus a setup mon. Some other matchups would require a Grim Gyarados lead, um, or a Grim Ting Lu lead. It just depends, and we'll dig into that a little more on the matchup side. So, just looking at the matchups, which by the way, I'm not going to be releasing this document. This was something I was typing up post Milwaukee. And I probably would have filled out this entire document had I had a good performance at Nats, but um, I just don't think it's worth it. And I feel like this video essay is going to just cover a lot of the things I would have typed anyway. Um, but yeah, I just have this here as a guide. So we could talk about balance first. Palafin balance was something that we were not really concerned about at all, because Terra Water Goldango just walls that 6 of Fluttermane, Amoonguss, Arcanine, Palafin plus 2. Usually we would see like Baxcalibur, Ting Lu, King Gambit, and Friends, right, in those additional 2 slots. But what made this very easy for us is that Arcanine can't hit Terra Water Goldango, Palafin can't hit it, Amoonguss can't spore it, and then Fluttermane is Fluttermane. It could do stuff, but the other 3 main like pivotal support Fire, Water, Grass Core Mons could do nothing into it, right? So this matchup seemed pretty easy for us, especially when we put up the screen of choice. And if we were able to get a free Thunder Wave onto Fluttermane, then Goldango's in a very good spot, especially if you manage to get up a nasty plot. Um, is there anything you wanted to add about this matchup, Andrew? At least specifically the Palafin balance?
No, that pretty much covers it. I mean, if they bring Palafin and give you a tempo to get up a nasty plot, then that's even better. So, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times they wouldn't even bring Palafin into us.
Yep.
Um, and they try their physical mons against us. But also in this matchup, we almost always had backhands and just made it a priority to get rid of Flutter. And then backhands just got rid of the other mons as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Yep.
yeah, if they managed to get through gold, they usually lost a lot of resources, and hands could clean up the rest. So
Mm-hmm. Yep. Pokemon's all a game of opportunity cost, right? And so the amount of resources that they would have to spend to take out Goldango is quite a big trade in our favor for the things that we can take out in the amount of time it takes them to take out our Goldango. Um,
yeah,
this whole team is basically opportunity cost as a concept, right? In my opinion.
yeah,
So, yeah, in that case, let's just move on to New Balance. This archetype, I'm sure everyone watching this is familiar. Chi-Yu, Fluttermane, Ting-Lu Gyarados, Iron Hands Amoonguss as the 6. Um, this matchup seemed very favorable for us before we went into Milwaukee, and then leading up to NAIC, it started to seem quite unfavorable as people started to figure out how to lead into us. Because the lead into our team can make a big difference for how the game plays out. And one particular person who taught me the importance of that was Nick Borgi, aka Lightcore. if he even still goes by that. Um, but we did plenty of sparring matches, and he pretty much destroyed me 80% of the time, because he would lead a Mungus plus a setup mon. Um, I think he was one of the first people using Nasty Plot Shiyu, because I saw him using it the moment Rexy dropped, and then he also had setup hands, and that he didn't have like the New Balance 6 at this time because I remember he had like Mimikyu and some other stuff. Um, but he was the first one that I had seen figure out a solid game plan into the Grimmsnarl setup lead. And so when our opponents started to figure out that they were leading Iron Hands in Amoonguss to see some good success, we really had to adapt. So some of the adaptations that we made was leading Grimmsnarl Gyarados, because that allowed us to put a pin on Iron Hands. And the way we would do that pin is if we had our Grim Gyarados lead into Amoonguss Iron Hands, our turn one would be to Terra Fairy to ensure we don't get like an immediate knockout from Wild Charge. We would Terra Fairy taunt the Amoonguss, and then Spirit Break into the Iron Hands. Because a lot, and I mean a lot of players, highly underestimate the damage that Grimmsnarl can put out. Even though we have no attack investment, it is still base 120, and it is like fairy moves are just great coverage in general in this format, given Iron Hands plus all the dark types, and Dragonite and friends, right? Um, so the Spirit Break would do about 40 to most Iron Hands, and so that set up a pin for the following turn where they want to Pollen Puff their hands, but they can't because if we Waterfall Spirit Break double into the hands, they can't avoid death. If they Terra Fire, Waterfall will finish them. If they remain electric fighting, then Spirit Break plus Waterfall will take them. Um, so that was one solution that we had found, but into some of the higher caliber players, we were finding a lot of issue with that lead, as well as the Amoonguss Chiyu lead with the Nasty Plot setup, Terra Water or Terra Grass, was causing a whole bunch of issues. So,
Yeah, real quick to jump in
yeah,
there.
yeah, jump
The,
in.
the, the issue with it is specifically when they run Clear Smogamungus, because
Yes.
normally that is fine with Iron Hands and Grimmsnarl, let's say, into the theoretical Chi-Yu Amoonguss.
Mhm.
Because we have screens and, um, we're threatening Drain Punches, and if they tear, we're threatening Wild Charges, and um, it generally goes okay, and especially if they Terra and we can get a T-Wave off into them.
Mhm.
Um, the issue is when the Amoonguss runs Clear Smog and is uh, negating any setup that our hands can do. And so the meta change of running Clear Smog and Amoonguss on these New Balance teams that occurred in the month of June uh, really did cause some issues there for setup hands.
Yep, you're very right because while we were
So
seeing some of the adaptations in their leads, we did also try Grimmsnarl Hands as our lead, and then like Andrew said just now, a lot of our ideas with that lead were negated by Clear Smog. So that allowed our opponent to pretty safely get up a nasty plot or two with Chi-Yu, because even a raw Drain Punch into a bulky Terra Chi-Yu would do like just under 50, right? It would make it a barely 3-hit KO. And that was really scary for us because um, we couldn't really capitalize off of anything in that scenario with Grim Hands into Amoonguss Chi-Yu. And
yeah,
so,
they had pollen puffs for days. They
yep,
clear smog, yeah.
yep. So that caused a bunch of issues, and that's kind of where the Grim Gyarados lead was born. That once again opens up Game 2 and Game 3 adaptations for Flutter Mane Chi-Yu leads. And we did actually see that in the game, the top 8 match between 45 Mice and who was his opponent? Do you recall?
Torviv,
Dorviv. Yeah, so
Torviv,
in
yeah.
that match, there was, I think it was Game 3, in fact, where it was Grim Gyarados
Yep.
versus Flutter Mane Chi-Yu, and we were sitting there literally front row in the crowd, and we were like, okay, well, let's see how he approaches this lead, because, like, for us, this is a pretty detrimental opener. And
And it was for him too.
it was for him because you watch him immediately go for the flinch on Fluttermane, and I'm like, that's my boy, you know?
Yeah, yeah. He was calling the physical lead instead of the special one.
Yep,
So if he called special, he would have brought his own Iron Moth and Fluttermane, I think.
yep,
But
I agree. So yeah, that
but we
was
were in a similar boat, having to call leads here.
yeah, it almost feels like a game of rock paper scissors, like lead roulette in a way. Um,
Yep.
Definitely not ideal because our matchup was much better for it going into Milwaukee, but yeah, like
Yes.
again, as we keep saying, Clear Smogamungus was really giving us issues. And there was no way to stop it from clicking Clear Smog over and over every turn. Um, and there was an opponent that I played where he just clear smogged me. This was at Milwaukee, not at NAIC, by the way, but he clear smogged me 5 turns in a row. I'm like, dude, please just let me get one sword stance up. I don't even think it was taunted. I think it was just clear smogging me because he had nothing else to do because he couldn't put anything to sleep. But yeah. So I'm trying to think, is there really anything else to touch on with New Balance? I mean, uh,
No.
I know they like whatever two they led with, it was almost always Gyarados hands in the back, or Gyarados Ting Lu in the back, depending on like what they led. Um, and whatever Terra type their Ting Lu was, it would just always give us problems. I feel like Ting Lu is just such a rock, you know. It's so good on all these teams. It could really be slotted on pretty much every team, I think. Just getting Ruination Chip. It's a great defensive tank switch in, especially for Gyarados being able to soak those electric attacks. But it does make for some really cool reads or outplays by being able to predict those switches.
Yeah, that's how you just have to beat this team is predict the switches.
Yep.
So
Yep, that's pretty much. You have to make pretty big calls to beat New Balance with Clear Smogamungus, that's for sure. And I know that I played at least 2 New Balances at NAIC, and I think I lost to them both. Because they both had Clear Smogamungus. um, Okay, and I guess we can move on to the iteration of like Palafin Balance, but with Swords Dance, King Gambit, like the Terra Dark, Black Glasses stuff. Um, so Howl Arcanine, I figured out was giving us quite a bit of issues. Um, there were some practice games that I had played where they would lead Arcanine plus their Howl partner, typically Baxcalibur or Dragonite, or King Gambit were the 3 most common I had seen. Were there any others that were on your radar, Andrew?
uh, those are the main ones. I mean, I guess sometimes they ran it with Palafin, but like I
Yeah,
said,
right.
Palafin wasn't brought to us that much.
Yep, Palafin itself didn't have a very good matchup,
And
so we
it,
didn't
and
see.
turn one that doesn't matter either with
Right,
Palafin.
exactly.
So.
Yep. So Howl, like I said, is tricky. The one way to really put screens in the dirt is to put setup in front of it and match our setup. And Howl being able to boost both partners really caused issues. Because it was only the opportunity cost of using one move versus both partners using a setup move. Um, so the way I mitigated this, and I also did this in day 2 of Milwaukee. I don't recall against who, but I know it was my round 1. They had led Howl Arcanine into me, and the one thing that I really liked doing was firing off an immediate Thunder Wave into Arcanine. That way, the Howl will always underspeed their partner, and so they get like a staggered benefit because the stat boost doesn't happen until after their partner is already gone. So instead of setting up the turn 1 Reflect, I did value the Thunder Wave just a wee bit more, especially if I had like a free Gyarados switch into Intimidate, negate that Howl, and then I can just start para-flinching slash 2 hit KO Waterfall onto the Arcanine, was super valuable. And I would be able to pretty much always get up a turn 2 Reflect. Um, the only instance where this is not applicable is into the King Gambit Howl setup. Um, Granted, I think I see Howl King Gambit less, um, unless it's Assault Vest. And
Yeah.
so the Assault Vest variants, they would typically be Terra Fire. And that, like, we can't switch Gyarados in very safely into that. I would say that that's the most difficult Howl partner for us. I don't know if you agree. Andrew, but in that setup, we would maybe
Yeah.
Thunderwave the Arcanine turn 2 and Reflect turn 1 because otherwise Ironhead, I think, takes us out. Takes out
Yeah.
Grimmsnarl.
As we showed, the Grimmsnarl, has defensive investment, but is mostly special bulk and is a lot less physically bulky than other Grimmsnarl.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, if people figure that out, or just didn't have to figure it out and just try to do an Iron Head or any sort of strong physical move into us, um, it was going to hurt a lot. So, um, yeah, specifically Iron Head from King Gambit, on the AV versions was troublesome.
Yep. I think we even had a better matchup into the Sword Stance Black Glasses variant. Because then we could reflect and sword stance. The one issue is that a good player such as like Luca or Ashton, they would create a pin into us where they would force us to Terra Fire to dodge the Will-O-Wisp, but then like a +2 Terra Dark, what was it, like Kowtow Cleave, would just send us straight to hell, right? It would just nuke hands straight into the ground, regardless. Well, maybe not regardless of reflect, but it would certainly do a number, right? And
Yeah,
so, yeah.
yeah, you'd have to just that matchup was precarious. I mean, both sides were threatened by things, and it
Mhm.
would come down to positioning, and there weren't really clear lines, I'd say.
Yeah, and
But
that's
but but against uh, less experienced players, they would just be scared to bring King Gammon in the first place,
yeah, that
which
was
is
awesome.
which was good for us. But
Yeah.
obviously, better players realize that actually you can still bring King Gambit if they're Terra Dark. So
Yep. Yep. And another thing I want to add is that I don't know if Ashton or Lucas variants ran this. I don't really know their teams off the top of my head, but that is one of the Palafin setups that I was scared of because not only do they create a pin with the threat of Will-O-Wisp and then like a boosted Kowtow, but also if they had a Palafin turn 1 and then they swapped it into Arcanine, that was really bad for us because then we only get a +1, right? And then if we like were forced to Terra Fire, then we're just going to get jet punched to oblivion, right? Um, so that was also very scary. And overall, I think it was probably easier to play into the SD Gambit versus the Terrifier AV with Howl because one, you don't need to use the setup move on Gambit. Like I said, opportunity cost. It allows them to run much more coverage moves. For example, even a non-boosted low kick would do about 30 to 40 to our hands. And then when it is boosted, that's quite catastrophic to like get 2-hit KO by it. By the low kick, that is. Whereas if it's Terra Fire, we can only hit with Drain Punch for neutral, and King Gambit has such a like naturally high defense and health stat to where we would lose that 1v1, even with Reflect.
yeah, in general, our coverage into Fire Mons wasn't the best, with only Tinglu's stab to hit
Hmm.
it. Tinglu was the only stab that could hit.
Right.
So,
Like we have
and
Gyarados,
obviously,
but we give up the Defiant too,
well,
which
yeah,
is
sorry,
huge.
in this version, yeah. We have
Yeah.
Gyarados, but exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So that was a little difficult. The again with the SD Black Glasses setup, I did really like to bring Ting Lu because when they opt to only have dark moves, it really makes the matchup way easier versus like when it has low kick, it really threatens Ting Lu, it really threatens hands. Um, King Gambit naturally really threatens Goldango, so this was a team sheet by team sheet basis on our game plan here. But I would say that I would be happier to see the Sword Stance variant than the AV variant, just as a summary.
Yep.
Okay, do we have anything else to really talk about on that front, or do you want to move on to the Talon Chomp stuff?
No, I think that's good. I mean, like, balance is meant to be balanced into most things, and it was pretty balanced into us.
Mm-hmm.
Palafin was weaker. New Balance was stronger when they had Clear Smog. SD Gambit was pretty 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, yep.
Cool. Okay, then moving on to Talon Chomp. I know like probably the James Evans 6 is probably the most popular here. What was that like? Talon Chomp, Adamant Chien Pao. What were the other three? Do you recall?
Um, Hands, Specs, Goldango, and Iron Bundle.
Gotcha. So this was also a tricky matchup. Garchomp and ground types in general, as you could imagine, were quite tricky into us, given that both of our setup mons were ground weak. Um, I did want to explore other setup mons after Milwaukee, but after testing, I couldn't really find a suitable replacement in time for NAIC, given that it was like 3 weeks away. So I ended up just running this same team. But anyway, our plan into Talonflame and Garchomp. If they led Talonchomp, I think that that was best case scenario for us. Because we would be able to immediately put a pin on Garchomp. Most Garchomps, and I think including James, were Clear Amulet. I could be wrong on James's team, but we run into a lot of Clear Amulet chomps.
I think James was Life Orb, but
Was he Life Orb? Okay. I would much rather run into Life Orb than Clear Amulet, given that we have Intimidate. Um, so Life Orb would have been a little bit easier for us as a fact, but we typically led Grimmsnarl and Goldango into
oh,
this.
actually James was Clear Amulet looking right now.
Oh, you're looking right now, yeah. Yeah, I
Well, at
think.
least for NAIC. I don't know. He could
Oh,
have had different iterations.
sure, yeah. Um, Yeah, and I played at a local premier challenge here in Indy, and I played a bunch of Garchomp throughout Swiss, and they were difficult, but they were manageable. Granted that they were not James Evans, right? That guy is an absolute beast of a player. Um, but my plan into it was they typically turn one, they'll do like one of three things with Talon, and none of those three things are Brave Bird. They would typically taunt Grimmsnarl. They could also Will-O-Wisp if I decided to lead hands, but like I never led hands, so Will-O-Wisp was quite rare. Or they would Tailwind. I also found that Tailwind was quite rare because they didn't have an immediate threat to outspeed. So typically they would turn one taunt my Grimmsnarl. And so depending on the Garchomp's Terra type, I really enjoyed just going for a straight up Spirit Break and Terra Water, like Make It Rain or Shadow Ball, turn one. And this is all team dependent, right? But I enjoyed doing that because it would put immediate pressure on the Garchomp and it would allow our backhands, which is typically what we would bring, it would allow backhands to do quite well into the remainder Mons. The other option, if it's not Clear Amulet, I do think Reflect turn 1 is probably better with a Terra Water Nasty Plot. And then turn 2, once you soak up the taunt, you can switch Gyarados in for Grimmsnarl and then either protect or you can fire off a big Make It Rain. Um, all situational because the thing about Garchomp is the game plan changes with their moveset. I know I sound like a broken record saying opportunity cost, but it's just the truth, right? Because a lot of the Garchomps will run EQ and Stomping Tantrum with Rock Slide or Dragon Claw as their coverage move, and then Protect.
And
But
sometimes Iron Head.
and sometimes Iron Head, right? Again, opportunity cost for the third move slot, right? It's always a ground move, and it's very often Rock Slide, and then the coverage move. So I've seen like Swords Dance is quite scary. Those are the scenarios where I would rather make it rain early. Um, and then there's also Substitute, like on Linduel's team. We have Sand further down on this list, so I won't get too into that. But Substitute was quite an issue for us, given that Chomp was faster than everything outside of Fluttermane. And then I was least concerned about Ironhead because, that doesn't really pick up Grimmsnarl since it's not stab, and we would get Reflect up. So, um, these also get kind of tricky if they bring back bundle. For example, if it's Garchomp Talon and then back bundle +1. If we are forced to Terra Water on that first turn, it creates quite this sticky situation for our Goldango. Um,
Well, even worse is back AV hands.
yeah, back AV hands is also really bad if we are forced to Terra Water. So, a good player could outmaneuver us out of that turn one. But yeah, and then also my overall strategy into teams like this because my buddy Grant Weldon, aka Velocity, he ran a Talon Chomp type of team as well at Nationals, and then we money matched in the hotel room. My strategy into him was to let Talonflame just sit there and be useless while I perma intimidated it. and I would like get some setup going. And then when Tailwind was about to end, I would just take the Talon off the field, so that way he couldn't get the reset on the Tailwind. The main important factor on Grant's team was that he had Tyranitar in the back, because it was clear amulet, it had low kick, and I believe assurance, not crunch. But that was very powerful into Gyarados because of clear amulet. It was very powerful into uh, Tinglu, Goldango, and so being able to deny the Tailwind for when that thing came out was very important in that matchup. But I am digressing a little bit because I know that like James's team doesn't run Tyranitar. But yeah, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on with the Talonchomp stuff?
I mean, it's just a game of Pokemon there. If you can get rid of the Garchomp before Hands comes out, then you're good. If the Mon that we want to take care of Garchomp, whether it be usually our gold, maybe sometimes a Flutter, but
Mm,
um, that wasn't good with Tailwind.
right.
Um, yeah, if we lose that first, then Hands is in a tricky spot. So it really just all those matchups were how fast can you get rid of Garchomp. So,
Yeah, and that's why I also liked doing the turn one Spirit Break instead of the Reflect play sometimes. Was if they were really greedy to conserve their Terra on the Garchomp, Spirit Break would do a bunch of damage, and then like if they had to switch in for Hands, like if they tried to switch Garchomp out for something like Hands or Bundle, they face big detriment of being hit by a Spirit Break. Bundle losing special attack by one stage, and then Hands just taking about 40% from Spirit Break. So it felt like a pretty good move to use to just like slot some guaranteed damage and some guaranteed threat if they don't Terra the Chomp.
yeah. Um, Specifically into that six, I think back Garchomp is probably good against us. That's
Hmm.
probably as well.
Yeah, I think back Garchomp is definitely the best way to play into us because the only real threat is like Water Gold at that
Yep.
point. But that
Yep.
being said, is they need a way to force the water out of Gold, or else Gold can like wall AV Hands and Bundle. So it's a give and
Yeah.
take. It's a game of Pokemon, like you said.
Yep. 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 The Specs Goldango could threaten our initial Goldango with Shadow Ball, but
Hmm.
um, yeah, I'd say this matchup was pretty even.
Hmm.
Um, but a good player could, obviously like James Evans, would probably have easy ways to set up pins. So
Hmm. Yep. Okay, well in that case, let's just move on. On this list, I also have Manual Hyper Offense Sun with like Murkrow and friends. And so, into those teams, I learned, especially because Grant was running that team for quite some time, things would get difficult because they don't need a Tailwind turn one. Uh, and so, specifically Grant's, I will say, was harder for us because he was running Clear Amulet Tusk versus the most common Scarf now. Um, but if we're into like Scarf Tusk plus Murkrow lead, something that I really liked doing was just setting up a turn one reflect and then going Terra Water Make It Rain. And the reasoning behind that is because if they did like Sunny Day plus Headlong Rush, even with the proto boosted attack, our Goldango eats it. And then they're at -1 in the defenses. I get off and Make It Rain. At the -1 special defense and the natively low special defense of Tusk, we would just get a guaranteed one hit knockout right off the bat, and we would break Sash on Murkrow if they're running Sash variant. Otherwise, it's just damage dealt, right? And getting the Tusk off the field was really nice. But again, things get difficult because once Sunny Day is up, pretty much every Mon that comes in subsequently is proto boosted. It's probably like Fluttermane, Chi-Yu, Bundle. I mean, Bundle doesn't really get the Sun boost, but you get the point. If I'm Terra Water Goldango, that puts me in a bad pinch. Um, so those games into Hyper Offense Sun, I guess my point of saying all this is that you don't have time to set up. You really just need to set up the screen and then start hitting things. Otherwise, you're going to get outpaced, and then you're just going to lose. Do you have any
yeah,
other input on that?
No, I mean it's similar to Talon Chomp stuff, just with some different mons, and
Yeah.
um, so
I
it's
think this
generally
is
the same thing.
easier than Talon Chomp to play against, for sure, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, it's a trade-off,
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah.
Uh, but once again, basically, if you can get rid of their ground mon, then hands does pretty well, especially if yeah, yeah, it just depends. Flutter is also tricky on these teams just because of how overpowered it gets. Um, it can kind of negate the light screen and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
but the key here is we usually would have Ting Lu, and so if let's say the um, Great Tusk is locked because of Choice Scarf, if it's locked into anything other than close combat, then Ting Lu does have a nice time being able to like get rid of Flutter and other things.
Hmm.
Uh, but it's just the positioning, uh, basically there.
Yeah, we would typically have like Grim Gold lead with Tinglu hands in the back. Fluttermane is very rarely brought. I just realized we've not like talked about Fluttermane at all on our team. If anyone watching has not noticed, we don't typically bring Fluttermane into these faster teams. Because one, I don't like facing down the unknown Fluttermane speed tie. Two, we don't have Shadow Ball, so like we don't have the raw damage output that other Fluttermanes have. Um, I mean, those are really the only two reasons. Like, we get outpaced by like Tailwind teams and just like overall specs max speed, timid Fluttermanes. We didn't really want to run into those scenarios and take a free loss. So we would typically go with a very defensive oriented setup into those kind of matchups.
Yeah, Fluttermane is brought in a couple matchups that we're about to get to, and then just against poorly constructed teams,
Yep.
maybe in the early rounds that don't have an answer for sub Flutter or something like that.
Mhm. Yep.
Um,
All right. So next on the list is Yon Solo Dozo. Um, Admittedly, we hardly thought about this matchup and hardly prepped for it before NAIC. Obviously, post NAIC, we have come to learn that that is a real threat, and that was something we probably should have prepped for more. I personally never ran into it during my run, um, but given that it just won nationals, it's very apparently good. One thing that I really liked is if they led Dozo Ting Lu, and they did, I mean, either Stealth Rocks, Ruination, Stomping, it didn't really matter because you can't yawn Goldango. And a lot of the Dozos would run Wave Crash plus one other damage move, whether it's Earthquake. I think it's most commonly Heavy Slam. Um, and so Terra Water Goldango kind of walls that duo and allows you to get up one, maybe even two nasty plots, especially behind Reflect. And then we would just cycle Intimidates onto Tinglu. It's usually Oblivious Dozo, so there is no cycling Intimidate onto that. Um, but yeah, the strategy into that was just set up a bunch of nasty plots. And thinking about like Alex's team in particular, I believe I have it
well,
on this tab.
yeah, the thing that makes it hard though is Dozo Tinglu eventually switched from using Stealth Rock to using Sand Tomb to trap
Hmm.
things in, and so uh, like I like Chance said, we didn't really prep against this, but in terms of realizing maybe how that matchup would go, it is tricky because the Sand Tomb can make Grimmsnarl be stuck on the field, so we can't intimidate cycle.
Yep.
It also puts
Guarantees
Gold in an
sleep
interesting
too.
spot because it's not so much um, that it's a ground coverage move against us. We really don't need a Terra against it. It's the fact that the passive damage negating the leftovers, and then if we're Ghost, if we say our natural typing, we can swap out of the Sand Tomb. But if we go to Water, then we are stuck.
Hmm.
So, um,
Yeah,
yeah, that's just kind of the nature there of the matchup.
yeah, and I still don't really have a solidified idea on whether or not we want to Terra Water on that first turn. I think it really depends on if they're Stomping Tantrum. Um, Alex has had Stomping, right? Stomping, Santum.
Yep, Taunt
Yeah,
and Ruination.
right. No Heavy Slam. Okay. Um, So yeah, I would probably still do the Terra Water because after I've set up, I'm really not trying to switch out. Um, but yeah, it's just a very finicky matchup. I really can't talk too much on it because we didn't practice into it. Just kind of looking at the pace from right now. I would say that if they led Chien Pao Dragapult, one thing that we could do is either Thunder Wave the Dragapult immediately and just like take it out, or we can set up Reflect and make it rain. Or we could even reflect and bring in Gyarados, right? Like these are lines that I have not run at all. They're just like me talking and thinking out loud. Um, Obviously, there's no reason to prep any of this anymore now that Reg C is over, but it's just ideas that I'm thinking of in the moment.
Yeah.
Just since we haven't really practiced that one too much, I'm good to move on unless you have any last comments.
Yeah, no, I'm good as well. We can't speak much on it since we didn't uh, prep much for it.
Okay. Yep. So moving on, Orthworm Ting anytime I saw Orthworm, I just paid what I call the Orthworm tax, and I would lead Grimmsnarl Gyarados. Um, I would typically see like a Tinglu Orthworm lead, and I would just immediately fire off a taunt into the Orthworm to prevent any iron defenses or shed tails. There was actually a time where I was theory crafting Avalanche on my Gyarados. The idea there was that Orthworm would set up a shed tail, and it would go into Dragonite, and Avalanche is guaranteed to move last, so it would always break the sub on Gyarados. However, I learned that it was not worth it because they could just Iron Defense instead, and then I would lose. So I put Taunt back on right after that game. Uh, and then from there, like you just set up the screens, try and maneuver yourself into another position where you can set up one of your two setup mons. Goldango and Hands both came to this matchup almost every time, given the 6, and how Hands is very good into Orthworm and Tinglu in general, just being able to outspeed and Drain Punch stuff. Um, but yeah, basically this game is a revolving door of Pokemon of always getting a taunt down on Orthworm when you can, and I don't really have much input outside of that.
Yeah, variants that could obviously pressure Gyarados well with an Iron Hands, either Fake Out or Wild Charge, um,
Mm.
would probably give us trouble. But again, this matchup was more niche, so there wasn't really much thought put into it at that point. It would just be a game of Pokemon figuring out how to position better than your opponent. So
Yeah, and
not much more
actually,
to say.
yeah, and you reminded me. We did actually have our friend above 5029. He's a great seniors player who got top 8 at EUIC. We gave him this team to run at NAIC, and he actually hit the Orthworm matchup in Swiss. And it was apparently catastrophic because that player did have Iron Hands with Assault Vest. And so they would turn one lead Fake Out plus Orthworm, and that guaranteed we couldn't taunt them. And so that was probably the worst case scenario Orthworm matchup. Um, and I still don't really know what we would do into Fake Out Shed Tail, honestly.
Yeah, not sure.
Like maybe we would get a Spirit Break onto the hands, but that's like the best trade we can get. So yeah, yeah, I think probably just put down immediate offensive pressure instead of a screen is like the best play there. And like I had mentioned earlier with like the Iron Hands Amoonguss pinch, you could do the same kind of pin in that matchup too, where if you Spirit Break the hands, you now threaten with Waterfall Spirit Break, even if there is a substitute Dragonite next to it. But that is also quite scary because then Dragon Dances come up and you're now at potential to get swept. So it's hard to say. This is not one we practiced a whole bunch. Um, we're about to get into a matchup that we practiced a bunch for. So I'm cool to move into that if you are, unless you have any last comments.
Nope, sounds good.
All right, this is the meat of the of the matchup chart, and that's Mousehold +1. Um, I hate Mousehold. Uh, Kindly. I well, it's not. I don't truly hate Mousehold, but boy, is it annoying, right? And so Mousehold Annihilate. And this is something that 45 Mice said on his stream yesterday as well, that he moved away from Pedon's, like, well, R6, and he put Iron Moth on instead of Ting Lu as a result to give himself an offensive mode. That, in hindsight, Andrew and I have both agreed that we both missed having an offensive mode. Um, and so I think that that decision, clearly it was a good decision because it netted him top 8 at Nationals, but we did still have ways to answer Mouse Ape. I had told Pat those ways to handle it, but they are still extremely intricate game plans to where we are quite reliant on people not sharing our game plan into Mouse Ape, and we are also very reliant on catching the opponent off guard in games 1 and 2. Game 3 sets can get kind of scary, but they're still manageable. I would say that this matchup is probably 60-40 favorable to Mouse Ape. Andrew, you might have a different opinion on that, but that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I played two different matchups here. Chance originated the lines, and then I helped refine them. Or at least you had the turn one play down.
Game 1,
But
turn 1, yeah.
yeah, but I had the opportunity to play both Henry Rich at a local, and then my round three at NAIC was also against that same Mouse Ape, Talon, Flutter, Screentail team with a +1.
hmm
So I had pretty good experience there, taking it to three against Henry Rich and winning 2-0 at NAIC. Um, but like Chance said, it relied on a bit of a surprise game one, and then kind of outplaying game two and hoping it doesn't get to a third game.
Yep.
Um, and so if anyone ever knew our game one strat, we'd probably be screwed.
And
But it did work very well. So,
yeah.
but we can reveal it now.
Yeah, and now the world's about to know our game 1 plan, right? I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure we did tell Pat what to do as well, or at least I did in Twitter DMs, but like he still said that it is a tough matchup, and he's not wrong. Um,
yeah,
so here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Turn 1, if they lead Mouse Ape, we always lead Fluttermane and Gyarados. And
yeah.
this is to
And, and,
get,
and it's not so much an if, they almost always lead Mouse Ape into us
yeah,
game one.
it's
Yeah,
a win they lead Mouse Ape. Because the thing is, they look at our team and they see that Annihilate outspeeds everything outside of Fluttermane, right? And so
yep,
they're like, oh, this is the freest matchup for a beat up Rage Fist. Like they think that in team preview immediately. And
yep.
so our plan was to lead Gyarados Fluttermane, and it makes them feel even more secure, right? Because then they get the Defiant boost at +1. But what they don't know is that a Helping Hand Terra Fairy Moonblast will take the KO on every single Mousehold. And so that's why the speed stat was important, because when you face Mouse Ape, you're always feeling like, oh, the ape is tankier than I expected, it's faster than I expected, it does more damage than I expected, and then same with the Mousehold, like, oh, it's tankier than I thought, it's faster than I thought. So our spread guarantees we outspeed every mouse, we get the OHKO on every mouse with Helping Hand and Terra Fairy.
Unless they
Um,
resist fairy with a poison
yes.
typing, but we were just hoping to matchup dodge that, which they are
Yeah.
quite rare, so it
Yeah.
really wasn't a consideration. But there you go.
Yeah. Leonard, I don't know if you're watching this at the time we drop it, but if you're watching it, you scared me shitless at Milwaukee when you got that Terra Poison Mousehold on the stream. That was Leonard, right? I'm pretty
I
sure.
believe it was.
Yeah.
Uh,
Wobblefett. And so the Terra Poison scared me, and I immediately started messaging Andrew after the event, and I'm like, bro, we gotta switch to Roaring Moon. Like, we just gotta do like the same thing but with acrobatics, or else we're screwed. And he was like, no, dude, screw your head on straight. We still need to use Fluttermane for other matchups. And I thought, okay, fine, Hex is cool, whatever. Um, I just rolled with it. But yeah, so the way this turn one played out is we would immediately nuke the Mousehold, and we would typically get a Rage Fist at +1 traded onto our Fluttermane. But what's nice is that Rage Fist is a 2-hit KO when you're Terra Fairy, and so it was a net good trade for us. The issue is the turn two there. A lot of times they would have Encore Bundle in the back, or they would have Screen Tail in the back. The way we would navigate around this moving forward is we would ignore the Annihilate for like the rest of the game. And we would have back Grim Snarl, which I think 45 Mice also mentioned that back Grim Snarl is quite nice into the Mouse Ape matchup.
Yeah.
Specifically into Screamtail and Bundle, the way it's nice is they both typically run Encore on these teams. And so I can like switch out Gyarados and Protect, or Sub, but
Well,
probably just
even
Protect.
better with sub usually.
Yeah, it depends, cause like if it's if it is Play Rough as a move slot on Screamtail, that actually breaks Sub, I learned. And
Yeah, play rough does, but they usually ran dazzle. But yeah.
yeah, typically Dazzle you could get a sub up, and if it's Bundle you can never sub. Um, so you would like Protect or sub turn 2, and then swap Gyarados to Grimmsnarl, and then that allows you to do the priority T-Wave Hex shenanigans that we've talked so much about. Um, People get really scared of losing their Rage Fist stacked Annihilate, so again, we continue to ignore it. We put down the Thunderwave Hex onto its partner, whether it's Bundle or whether it's Screamtail, um, and just do our thing from there.
Yeah.
Sometimes we would lose our, well, oftentimes we would lose the Fluttermane after the second KO, but by then Fluttermane's done its job of wiping 2 opponent mons. Um, it is a little scarier against Terra Water Ape because our waterfalls don't do as much, but I think we ran into more, at least I ran into more Terra Fire Apes, which is just better for us.
Well, I ran into more water, but yeah, I think we were
Yeah.
never actually trying to hit them with waterfall anyway. Um,
Yeah, the main goal was to get it alone and taunted and sit there and sad, while we
yeah,
like set up 3 swords dances at the end of the game, right? So,
yeah.
um,
Well, so how it went in general was like you said, Gyarados flutter with back grim, snarl, and hands, and
mhm.
so yeah, the idea is you deny them any rage fist boost. You only give them a +1 defiant and get rid of the mouse, and so then everything in the back falls to priority T wave hex, whether it's Screamtail, Flutter, who has specs that can't protect, um, Bundle, uh, Talon Flame, even.
Yeah,
Uh, but so it's they get in a tough spot because you also are able to weave in a T wave against their own ape, and so ape is sometimes not even able to move, which is very helpful.
mhm.
Uh, just denying it one more bulk up or one more rage fist somewhere or drain punch. Um, So I had in my matchups there that I referenced before, there were times when Ape just was full paralyzed or it like targeted wrong and allowed me to maintain a sub on Flutter or something like that. There were just lots of opportunities for you to get a free turn off and allow Flutter to just nuke everything other than the Ape slot. Um, so eventually Flutter would go down, like Chance said, and then you would have back hands against solo Ape, and the Ape is only at maybe +1 defense, +2 offense,
Mhm.
and you can just get up swords dances faster than it can take you out, and then you nuke it with a wild charge. So
Yeah, and that's the other thing that's really nice about Thunderwave, in that the longer something sits on the field with Thunderwave, it's like not even really hacks reliant at that point because it's a 25% chance per turn, right? And so the more
no, I
turns
mean
that
people
pass,
talk all the time about how it's bad to rely on sleep powder because it's only 75% accurate.
yeah,
Well, guess what? If we get a T wave off on you, yeah, it's only a 90% accurate move, but if we do, like now all your moves are 75% accurate
yeah.
essentially.
Pretty much you're trying to hit
So
sleep powder every turn.
yeah,
So,
so a lot of teams just don't have T wave uh, defenses, and
mhm.
we're able to take advantage of that. So players can't really be upset when they're just you know they're not built to withstand it.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, and then one more calc that's good to know is that a um, this comes into play mostly in the game two against the Mouse Ape. After we beat them game one with the surprise strat, where really they don't have much counterplay other than knowing what's coming at them, or if we miss priority T waves, which can happen 10% of the time.
Mhm.
Um, if we miss those into the slot that is an ape, um, we're put into some trouble when we can't get rid of them just one turn after another. Um, But anyway, game two, we would usually then swap to Grim Gold, either calling out their own Mouse Gold, which we would win as long as we Terra Water. Um, this team usually ran Terra Water Blast and Make It Rain. They didn't even have um, a Shadow Ball. Um, so Terra Water just completely walls their own Goldango, um, which I failed to do in time against Henry Rich game two, and that lost me the game. But anyway, um, uh, we would then Grim Gold with back Gyarados Flutter. And so uh, a good calc to know is if they happen to still lead Mouse Ape against you, you still have ways to play around it. In turn one, you would T-Wave the mouse, and you would Terra Water Gold and Nasty Plot. And so what that would do is, as long as you hit your T-Wave, the beat up goes off after the Rage Fist. So uh, it's just a 50 base power Rage Fist into Terra Water Gold, and it does like 2 or 3 leftover hits at most.
Mm-hmm.
Not much at
Minimal.
all.
Minimal
So
damage.
from there, they're in a spot of, well, they only have a 75% chance to actually get off the beat up. If they don't, we're in a great spot. If they do, um, it's still okay. Next turn we can get up Reflect, and we can Nasty Pot again because we need to get the +4 in order to take out that mouse hold.
Yep, that's the
Plus two
real
make it
important calc.
plus
Is
two make it rain does not take out
yep.
that mouse hold that is especially bulky, so you need to get the +4. And we still live the second Rage Fist, but you have lots of outs because one, they have to get through the paralysis. Two, they have to actually choose to target down your gold. Um, Maybe they get greedy and do a bulk up, which happened to me. They decided to bulk up turn two. I was like, okay, thanks.
Yeah, we take
Um,
those.
so yeah, basically the plan there, you get mouse hold off the field, and even it worked best really well for me at NAIC because the turn that I made it rain to take out mouse, mouse had just protected, so I knew it was gone. But then they decided to protect uh, their ape, so they didn't even get a rage fist off in the gold. They just let mouse go down for free. uh, so you have room there to catch your opponent not playing optimally. And then in the back, what happens is, as long as you get a T wave off into their ape and take care of the other slots, which are usually pretty easy to do, um, helping hand hex takes an ape, as long as they're paralyzed. So I got into a position where I was able to get rid of all the other slots other than ape. Fluttermane was on the board, and I could just sub and swap in Gyarados. And so they were at a spot where, sure, if they Rage Fist into the Gyarados swapping, Gyarados is dead, but now I have a sub Flutter, and I can just launch 2 hexes and I win. Or if they Rage Fist the Flutter and break sub, well, then I got Gyarados in for free, and Helping Hand Hex takes it, and I win. So uh, that was very nice to have. The lines were definitely intricate, like Chance said, and if anyone knew game one, then we'd probably be screwed. But we definitely did a lot of flow charting to figure this out.
A bunch. And a huge shout out to Cal Nissen, the best Mouse 8 player that I know personally, um, who helped us with these matchups a lot.
Yeah, he
Especially
did.
because he had a faster ape too, and so like that made things a little more difficult. But also because I'm not sure if you said this explicitly, but the helping hand hex calc is through Terra. So even if they're Terra Fire or Water, the helping hand hex will get the Oko even if they're
Oh,
paralyzed.
yes, sorry, yeah, that I was assuming that in my head, but yes,
Hmm.
that's the great part. They, obviously if they don't tear, that takes, but
Right.
when they tear out, we still get it, which is
Yep.
amazing.
Yep. So yeah, that's pretty much the entirety of the Mouse 8 matchup. I know sometimes they would lead Mouse Gold, but like Andrew just said, they were running Terra Water Blast more often than Shadow Ball, so like we didn't really have any issues there. I've also seen alternatives where instead of Terra Water Blast, they had Thunderbolt. Like I rarely saw Shadow Ball, which I thought was so odd, and I'm guessing their logic is that Rage Fist is already their ghost coverage, but I really do think Shadow Ball is just the better move on Goldango. I mean, like, it hits everything outside of normal types. It's stab. I don't really see the purpose of running Thunderbolt in my opinion. Um, and yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Um,
Yeah, on setup gold, it's definitely more niche, but
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, we take those. Like, it was like a mix of getting a good matchup that the Goldango doesn't have Shadow Ball, and that we had these very intricate plans for Mouse Ape. Um, so now the world knows, which is totally fine with me. I'm happy that I was able to share this, because it is a very problematic matchup that some of my past teams were able to handle better. And when this team, I realized it was a big problem, we had to find a way around it versus adjusting the team itself.
Yeah, so
And that's where we
definitely
landed.
relies on surprise and hitting T waves, but that's what we had to work with.
Yeah, and then hey, once you hit a T wave, they're hitting sleep powders for the rest of the game.
Yep.
I'll move on to Sun. The I think the weather matchups are going to be pretty short discussions. Sun, I am mostly talking about Torkoal Lilligant or Torkoal Jumpluff. Also the potential lead of Torkoal Fluttermane. Um, this matchup seemed pretty easy for us, in my opinion. And the reason why is because they couldn't sleep powder. Alright, let me take a step back. Our lead was Grimmsnarl Goldango. And the reason why is because we would typically like set up a screen like light screen and Terra Water. Because one, you can't sleep powder, assuming Lilligant. You can't. Well, I guess both run Leaf Storm, but Lilligant was more of a problem because I actually played Joe UX9 on the ladder, and he very obviously read the Terra Water, given that I can't take an eruption to the face, and so he just fired off a Leaf Storm into my Water Goldango turn one.
You
Um,
played somebody who was called Joe UX9. We don't know for a fact if it was him, but
I'm I'm damn near certain that the account Joe UX9 is him on Showdown. That's all I got.
yeah.
But yeah, he Leaf Stormed into my Goldango, and it didn't take it because of light screen. It did about 70. And so I just returned Make It Rain, took Lilligant down to like 1. Torkoal got some chips so that the eruption was much less valuable. Um, and then from there, the matchup was a lot easier because I could just start spamming Thunder Waves. I could put up another screen if I saw fit, but I typically would forego Reflect because it was almost always Torkoal Lilligant Flutter +1 into us. So there was not really too much threat for the Reflect, and I would just start spamming Thunder Waves, or I would Spirit Break into Torkoal to make it even more neutered. Um, and the nice thing about facing that matchup is that -2 Lilligant then still cannot take the Goldango, depending on the remaining HP. And like Torkoal at -1, or even just like the fact that Torkoal's special defense is so frail, like sometimes I would just fire another Shadow Ball into it at -1 and it would do about half, or maybe a bit less. Um, so I don't know. That matchup seemed really easy for us, relative. Do you have any comments on that one?
um, yeah. I mean, I don't know if easy is the right word, but there were definitely,
Favorable. I would say
um,
favorable.
yeah. I mean, it's all about positioning again. So,
Always is.
um, I mean, they can definitely have ways to outplay.
Yeah,
Um, there's lines and things. So,
there is, yeah. But what made it really difficult for them to get those lines is that, like I said, it's a pretty primarily special attacking team, and so Back Ting Lu also really shined in that regard. Um, so yeah, that that's what made it, in my opinion, a favorable matchup, especially because we also have Snarl, we have Heavy Slam to take Flutters, just a lot of answers, right? Um, More than most teams have, I feel like.
yeah.
So that's all I really wanted to say about Sun. I know that we only have a little bit of time remaining, so let's just run through these last ones real quick. The Rain matchup, we mostly practiced against the Gavin Michaels version where he had max health and defense bold flutter, so it was quite slow and quite tanky and a trick room setter. What's nice? Well, it's not really a nice matchup because we did struggle into it, and there are a lot of lines. But one thing that is nice is that Goldango and Hands do quite well into this team. So we always decided that the four were Grimmsnarl Goldango lead with Hands Gyarados in the back. Gyarados because it can benefit off of the rain set. It can also spread a bunch of status moves. Grimmsnarl because it's Grimmsnarl sets up screen or both screens. Basically the concept. was that with at least Gavin's Flutter Mane, it wasn't strong enough to take Goldango or to take Grimmsnarl in one turn. And so we would try and get the Flutter Mane off the field as fast as possible in lieu of going for a setup move. Um, and the reason for that is because that allows us to just set up an early reflect to take the rest of the game. Because the remaining mons, at least in our practice, we learned that like Fluttermane Azu was probably the best lead, or Fluttermane plus another, with Pelipper
Well,
hands in the back, right? Is that what we decided?
uh, well, I mean, the main things are if they leave Fluttermane Azu, then they're trying to snipe maybe Grimmsnarl,
Yeah.
special and physical from each end. And if they leave Fluttermane Hands, who has Fake Out, then they can play the Fake Out shenanigans on Grimmsnarl and try to snipe something. But
Right.
um, just the main contour of this matchup is that Reflect is more important than Light Screen because it's basically an Azu team. Um, and so if you can only get one screen up, you want to get up Reflect. And yeah, as the sooner you can get off Fluttermane, then the sooner back hands and our own hands can have a good matchup into the rest of the team.
Yep.
So um, yeah, we prioritize getting up Reflect. We prioritized an early Make It Rain to get Flutter down to about 20% where it's going to fall to a waterfall or anything else.
Mhm.
So uh, yeah, that was the general idea with this. I'd say I felt more comfortable against Rain than Sun personally, but um, yeah.
Yeah, for me it was the other way around. I would have rather played a bunch of Sun teams. I mean, I only played one Rain team at Nationals, and it was not that hard to win. Mostly because it was an unconventional Rain team, but I won't really dig too much into that. This is more of a report about all the matchups, so. Um, Yeah, it was, I think, a slightly favorable matchup, Rain, that is, just given that we had two Pokemon who didn't really need to Terra to have like good natural resists in Goldango and Grimmsnarl, or Goldango and Hands. Screens makes it even harder for them. I I also would like to say that I enjoyed prioritizing Azumarill most of the time, because our hands was much faster, and Wild Charge I believe could take it out without any sword stances. So. Um, it was nice to get rid of that. I would say Rain Palafin is much harder than Gavin Rain with the Azu, for that reason.
No, that's true.
Because Palafin
Um,
would outspeed and a big Terra Water Wave Crash and Rain would actually just annihilate hands.
yeah, that's fair. We played more Palin. We played more like the Palin's version, but not the Palafin Rain. That was piloted by Jody and Ragav, and
Hmm.
so yeah, I guess uh, I don't really have much to say against that matchup because we didn't prep it as much. But I
Yep,
agree that it would be much harder.
I agree. Yep. And I also don't have much to say because yeah, we didn't practice it. So I was kind of just banking on the fact that everyone was like hating on Palafin on Twitter, and I'm like, okay, maybe not many people will run Rain Palafin now. And then of course it gets like two people in the top eight at nationals, so that was funny in hindsight. All right, moving on. I only really want to briefly talk about Sand because it's a very, very rare matchup, but I did manage to hit it in Milwaukee Day 2 against Linduel, the famous Lin Titar, or Lintar as it's more commonly said. And so, just talking into this real quick, this was hard because of Sub Garchomp, which I mentioned earlier. Um, Sub Garchomp in combination with Corviknight made Fluttermane like in a very odd spot. And if I remember correctly, he was Terra Steel. And so if he just uses Terra Steel and we have Hex with no Thunder Wave, it made things hard. And this is also part of what inspired the speed change on hands with the Thunder Wave into Terra Garchomp as well. Um, I didn't really have a great game plan into this other than leading Grim Ting Lu and just spamming Ruination into Garchomp, but overall Milwaukee, Lin just outplayed me in game three, and he was able to take me down. So not a whole bunch to say here other than it's a pretty even matchup, but Lin is just a Mastercraft Sand T-Tar player. I don't even think he brought Sand into me. I think he brought Flutter, Chomp, Corviknight, and then whatever his fourth was, I don't quite remember. Um, but yeah, that's about all I have to say into that. I don't think I brought Goldango. Maybe I did. It was definitely no. I think I brought Goldango in game one and lost because Chomp is just faster, and then like he was just out pressuring my Mons, and so I had to drop Goldango for back flutter to try and snipe it, but it didn't. It worked out game two, but not game three because I think he just like read into my win con and played around it. So, um, moving on, I just want to talk about Dozo Giri with our remaining 5 minutes, and there are really two variants here in that we have unaware Dozo Giri and we have oblivious Dozo Giri. Um, into our team, unaware is strictly stronger into us, given that it pretty much invalidates all of our setup mons. And so it guaranteed that we need to bring Grimmsnarl, Tinglu, Gyarados, and Fluttermane. And so the strategy here is to just get rid of the threats that are not Dozogiri as soon as possible. Um, so like with things like Glimora and Dragonite, I would turn one lead like Grimmsnarl, Tinglu. I would Terra Poison my Grimmsnarl, assuming that the Glimora was not Corrosion. I did run into a Corrosion Glimora at Nats in round one, and I managed to sneak a win. But I do think Corrosion's a little harder for us to deal with, given that we only have one Poison immunity. I'm digressing a little bit because into Unaware Dozo, all we can really bring are those four that I listed, and Goldango would be mostly dead weight since we couldn't set it up. Um, but yeah, the strategy is just to get Dozo Giri on the field as soon as possible, fire off a Thunder Wave and intimidate it. And then from there, we need a safe way to get Fluttermane in. Once Fluttermane is in, you have four opportunities to paraflinch it and get a free substitute, right? Um, and then Hex will do about 40% depending on the how the Dozo's trained. And so um, you could either do like Waterfall Hex to go for another paraflinch. You could do Helping Hand Hex, which would net about 65, like 60-65 area of damage. It all depends because sometimes it would set you up in a position to then Hex and Thunderwave the Giri on its way out. I would say that that is only important to try and do into Scarf Tatsu because otherwise you outspeed naturally with Flutter, and it's better to just keep your sub. Um, so yeah, I guess as a summary for Unaware Dozo, get the others off the field, get Dozo Giri in, paraflinch it into a free substitute, and start spamming Hex. And I know, Andrew, you had shared with me a VOD from, I think it was EUIC, where another player did this. It was like another Grimmsnarl team with me,
Um,
or maybe it was some other matchup. Do you recall?
um, well, I know at EOIC, Jamie Boyd has had a stream game. He didn't have Grimmsnarl, but
Right.
he had the Hex Flutter with sub, and he had Gyarados with T Wave.
Mhm.
He also had Iron Head though on Gyarados, so the paraflinch chance was a bit higher.
Mhm.
Um, but anyway, the lines were. I mean, I knew about those lines before the Jamie Boyd matchup, but seeing him use them kind of confirmed that that would be our best shot against Unaware Dozo. So,
Yep. Yep. So shout out Jamie Boyd for that one. So then into Oblivious Dozogiri, it's a little easier because Terra Water Goldango typically walls these. You can see down here I put like offensive variant. It makes things very nice to where I can have my Grim Team Lou lead still. Excuse me, and I can just set up like a light screen with a heavy slam onto Flutter, or I can start spamming snarls, stompings, ruinations. You know, every move is great here. And it really just depends on what they lead. Typically, until like Chi-Yu bundle, I would do Snarl because they're a defensive. If they're a defensive Terra on Chi-Yu, I would Snarl. Otherwise, I would maybe just go straight for the Stomping given our EV spread. And then if we get into a spot where the Dozogiri comes out, we could then have Terra Water Goldango to wall it. Because most of the Dozo that I saw with this build, they had Wave Crash, Heavy Slam, and then either Rock Slide or Earthquake. And with Reflect Up, we really didn't have a lot of issues with that. Especially getting up a nasty plot and then you just start spamming Shadow Ball. So this matchup's way easier than the Unaware version, but we did still have an answer for the Unaware version in the idea of Hex substitutes paraflinch spam. And I think that wraps up all the matchups. In terms of closing thoughts, I am still going to use Grimmsnarl and Rig D. I already have a team built, and I'm working on it right now. But I think Grimmsnarl was slept on all the way from Rig A to C. I really do think that Grimmsnarl is going to have a great showing, and huge shout out to 45 Mice for finally putting Grim on the map in his top 8 NAIC run. That's incredible, and I'm glad to see that someone else believes in Grimmsnarl the way that we do. Um, and yeah, I guess that's all the closing thoughts I have. Is there anything else you want to wrap up with, Andrew?
Yeah, I just think in general screens were in a good place towards the end of Reg C, so yeah, it was good to see a good placement with it.
Yeah,
Um, I haven't done much Reg D myself, so I'm not sure how viable screens are, but I'm excited to uh, yeah continue to team build and figure out where to go.
for sure. Yeah, and then I guess just special shout outs. We shout out a few people throughout here, but the main one would be the High Rollers Discord. It's a bunch of boomer VGC players like myself. They did a great job at prepping me for a bunch of the matchups, letting me do a bunch of VO3s against them. So thank you to all of you. You know who you are. And also shout outs to Pedons and 45 Mice again for stellar performances with Grim Snarl. Especially Patrick, especially. It was a pleasure to give you the team and see you do well with something of our own creation. It's very validating and very humbling. So great job and thank you for that. And I guess we can wrap it up there, right? So, uh, yeah. Thank you guys for watching if you watch this whole thing. And I'll catch you at the next event. Bye.